Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Ken Trump, President of National School Safety and Security Services from Cleveland, Ohio. Today's topic is part of our webinar series in the COVID-19 response with a focus on school reentry. Communicating effectively with school stakeholders in highly ambiguous and uncertain times. Certainly highly ambiguous and definitely uncertain times, to say the least. Our roadmap for today covers 6 areas. First of all, ambiguity research. What does the research tell us? I'm working on my doctoral program, Johns Hopkins, on school emergency planning from a perspective of superintendent and principal communications with parents about school safety in highly ambiguous and uncertain times. We cannot be more uncertain than we are now. Typically, we're looking at school shootings, the periods after high-profile weather and natural disasters, but the challenges today are greater than any particular isolated location. They are affecting us across the United States and across the world. Second area for discussion today is the back-to-school story. As we start school reentry, the media attention will certainly focus on back to school. What does back to school look like? What works well? What problem areas do we see? What type of concerns do parents have? These and other questions, and how the media frames stories, and then turn how your community will frame stories, will be part of our discussion today. Who and where are your stakeholders? What platforms are they on? Where are they communicating? Who are they? Oftentimes we have a very narrow perspective in terms of our stakeholders, and our stakeholders need to be segmented and are actually many in terms of key players in our school communities. And what do they want to know? What do each of those groups of stakeholders want to know? What are their concerns? What are their fears? What are their anxieties? What reassurances do they need? And then how do you communicate that? How do we communicate in a world where we have multiple screens going at any one time in any living room? How do we communicate to our various stakeholders that have very diverse way of preferring to receive information? And then what next steps do we take? What should we do to develop a strategic communications plan that will meet the needs of all of these stakeholders? So let's get at it. We're facing a world of dramatic change. There's certainly no greater time in my 30+ years in school safety that we have had more ambiguity, uncertainty, and dramatic change consistently, back to back, day to day, at any given point in time. And when we have this type of dramatic change over an extended period of time repeatedly, that creates an enormous amount of anxiety and uncertainty in school communities. We need to address that, and that anxiety is best addressed through clear communications, concise communications, and information that is accurate and supports and empowers people. One of my favorite quotes about the unknowns is that quote by former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld back in 2002, where he stated, "As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know." And if one looks throughout the history of our country and other free countries, it is the latter category that tend to be the difficult ones. The unknown unknowns. And that's where we are today. Recent surveys show that parents are very anxious to send their children back to school. I'm included in that group as the father of 2 teenagers. But we also have, as parents, a lot of unknowns, uncertainties, questions, concerns, and anxieties. So let's talk about how we address those unknowns and ambiguity and uncertainty with a look at the research. What does the research tell us? Research on ambiguity and uncertainty tells us several important things. First is difficulty in comprehension, and there's a great deal of discomfort when information that is available about a crisis, an emergency, an unfolding pandemic is really insufficient to meet the needs that people have to function, to operate, to exist on a day-to-day basis, when that information is very multifaceted. We're getting tons of information across multiple sources. Many times that information is conflicted. It's direct opposite from credible sources, and it leaves a great deal of doubt. So this confusion, ambiguity, uncertainty creates a difficulty for people in comprehending things and a great deal of discomfort in their day-to-day life. And the human reaction to uncertainty, as pointed out by Drs. Seeger and Selnow, renowned communications researchers, quoting Carl Weick, one of the founders of organizational psychology, is very simple. The average human reaction is, I've never been here before, I have no idea where I am, and I have no idea who can help me. And that creates a great deal of stress, trauma, anxiety for people by having no idea what to do. We refer to things in our minds, in our day-to-day functioning, in our lives, how we behave, how we operate, based on stories and pieces of information and experiences that are chunked away in our brains, in our long-term memories to refer back to, so we know how to relate today based on our experiences and understandings from our past. When we don't have that information, we tend to seek it out from a variety of sources through a number of different channels, and that can lead to very conflicting and confusing situations. Where do we turn for information? Where do your parents, your students, your staff members, and your schools turn to information? They turn to information from family and friends. My uncles, brothers, cousins, nephew told me that. My sister's brother-in-law from her first marriage, whose cousin was an attorney, said. I have a friend who I went to school with who was a doctor before he turned into a different type of profession, but he remembers from back in the day. And as we refer to all of these different sources, it gets more and more confusing. Government officials, think about the time now. We have at the federal level and at our state levels very conflicting information across the country. It's not a political statement, it's a reality. If we just watch the news on the same day, the government representatives in many states from different agencies, as well as at the federal level, can give very differing stories, single comments that tend to send people in different directions and may directly conflict one another, even from within the same government departments, or certainly the same administrations. Or if the legislature says one thing and the governor says another. Many of you are living this experience right now as school leaders, trying to figure out, who do we believe, who do we follow, what do we know today, and then tomorrow that changes. But our parents and our community members, our staff, our students will also listen to key figures out in the community, traditional media sources, and certainly social media. I saw it on Facebook, therefore it's true. And then many other unofficial sources. So as you can see, there's many sources of information can lead to a great deal of ambiguity and uncertainty. And the best way to manage that is to be the news channel, to be the credible source of information for your school community. And we're going to talk about how you can do that even when you don't have the answers. You don't have all of the answers. You have some of the answers. You have an idea. you still can reduce ambiguity and uncertainty and empower your school community so they don't turn to these other sources of information. So back to school. We're going to be heading back to school at some point in time in some states, in some manner, in some form. Much of that still to be determined, but we do know for certain at some point we're going back to school. So what's the back to school perspective if we need to start out? First of all, looking at the narratives that will be created. We create narratives to make sense through different stories and accounts. That's in traditional media as well as in our own mind. And when we see stories done on back to school, particularly in our traditional media forms, we see various themes and narratives. Research shows from also from Seeger and Salnow in their 2016 book on narratives of crisis situations, several themes that tend to prevail in traditional news stories. The blame victim. Is there someone to blame? Something went wrong. Who's responsible? Should they have known? Why didn't they know? Is there information out there to tell them? And that could be a situation with frustrated people. If your school is targeted politically, if you as school leaders have certain parents or school community members who just don't quite like the way you've done things or you've had a negative encounter, you have a greater risk of people who are try to create a narrative out of how you manage school reentry by pointing blame. Certainly in the media stories, again, we'll see victims, we'll see a theme of narrative and heroes, memorials for those who have been lost, who've been harmed, who've been injured, and then a sense of renewal, a sense of revitalization, a sense of renaissance, a sense of taking a lead, being a champion. And I challenge you to focus on creating that last narrative for your school community. How can you create a strategic crisis communications plan, messaging today, starting today, through school reentry that's focused on renewal? We've all had a rough time. I've not talked to one person in education, one parent, one child who has a great positive thing to say about their experience we've all had as a nation and as a world. But we can reinstill hope and we can focus on renewal and empowerment and revitalization in our messaging and the positive things. And we've seen that with a lot of schools now. Our school administrators and teachers and staff have been doing amazing things to try to focus on keeping a positive aspect from social, emotional, online activities, school spirit weeks from crisis online learning, parades and other types of greetings and celebrations and morning news announcements, just to make that personal connection that they make every day and give that sense of hope and empowerment. And we're going to need to create that message as we re-enter back into schools. So if you look at the traditional approach to school communications, it's been one, particularly in our relationships with the media, of when you're in deep trouble, say nothing and try to look inconspicuous. We can see the one face that stands out in the crowd here that doesn't quite belong. And that's just not an option for today's communication strategies. And progressive school leaders are realizing that we need to be proactive in all of our communications with our school communities, our stakeholders, and we can no longer just hope that things will work out, step back and wait for someone to tell us to do. We also have to embrace some of the new social media communications and platforms that are out there. We still run in from time to time some people who just aren't ready as school leaders to embrace social media, to get into some of the more technology-oriented things. I always thought this was funny. iPhone and YouTube, and that's the extent of my social media experience. And we know that we're getting a lot better in our schools at embracing those various digital forms of communications. And we're going to talk about some of those, video being one of the most popular, fastest growing forms of communications that you can use today. But we can't stay old school on just not going there, because our parents are there, our students are there, our faculty and staff are there, traditional media is there, and certainly our entire school communities in one form or another are in the social media arena. For those who are just joining, I'm Ken Trump, President of National School Safety and Security Services in Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome. I see we've also had the Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia area joining us as well. Welcome, and thanks for being a part of today's session. We will provide an opportunity at the end in the chat box for questions, and I'll also point you to some additional resources when this session is over that will be online, as well as a recording of this session. Let's take a look at who our audiences are. And a lot of times we think very narrowly in terms of our audiences, but as school leaders, we really have a broad base of constituencies if you do segmentation of your communications. And that's an important idea, segmenting your communications. One size does not fit all. We don't communicate to students the same way that we communicate to our school board members, our community partner agencies, or perhaps the media. And we certainly communicate differently to teachers and support staff than we may speak with our parents. So the first challenge for you is to identify your audiences, plural. It's not just one audience. So step one to developing a strategic communication plan is to pause and say, who are the various audiences? Who are the various people we need to get messages to, who are key stakeholders? And let's break those out. Let's identify them. Let's put them very concretely in writing, in a chart, in a spreadsheet, whatever organizational tool you're using, because then we're going to go back to those different audiences and ask, how do those different audiences receive information? How do they get information about different issues? What tools, what platforms, and then what type of information are they seeking? What do they need? I know that as a parent, I need different information than what my high school teenager wants to receive. She'll get an email about certain assignment, certain project, a field trip, some information. I have different questions than she has about it. I have different focus, a different interest, different motivations. Your board members, your school leaders, your board of trustees are going to have different types of focuses and different areas of emphasis than other individuals, such as your teachers and your support staff. And I want to touch on the support staff piece here for a moment, because oftentimes we don't recognize that we have various subgroups within our school employees. We certainly have our teachers, and there are various subgroups within those teachers, but there are also many different levels and functions in our support staffs. We're working a great deal now with school districts across the country, ranging from large school districts in the southeastern part of the country to Alaska's Department of Education, on facilitating planning, questions, and organization for operational school reentry. And we know that the facilities department has a great deal of at stake, a great deal of skin in the game, a great deal of responsibilities as we open schools, but they have very different questions and different concerns and different needs for information than our transportation, our school bus drivers, our transportation managers, our food services, nutrition staff have their sets of questions. So try to break down the various constituencies, the various audiences that you have. And then also think, where are your audiences, your internal audiences? How do they get information? How do they receive different types of information in a manner that your external audiences get? Where do your parents get information? One of the things that we encourage school leaders to do and communications directors is to do some basic data collection from your various audiences, a couple short question surveys on where do you prefer to get your information? How do you want to get your information? Don't just assume that your entire school community is going to be on Facebook or Twitter. Instagram may be a way to get information out for certain segmented audiences that you have in your school community. How do your students prefer to get information? Email may not be the preferred form. It certainly may be a tool, but there are other ways you can reinforce messages through various forms of social media. So do an analysis, a formal information collection, and then take a look at the results. And what I predict that you'll find, if it's consistent with what we see around the country, is that you're going to find that you have a very diverse audience. You have a very diverse audience need in terms of how they prefer to get information. Some people still prefer to get the old hard printed newsletter that will come home with their child. Many prefer to get an email. Others prefer Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, some type of weekly bulletin that's pushed out. Text messages for urgent mass notification systems. So take a look at that, analyze it, because we're going to encourage you to communicate the same messages, communicate consistently, and communicate with redundancy across multiple platforms. Some of you may find that your school communities focus very heavily on getting information from 2 or 3 sources. Others may find that it's a bit choppier, that your people get information that's not heavily concentrated, but perhaps in one area, maybe 2, but spread across 5 or 6 areas. So how can you spread your messaging with redundancy, with some type of repetition across different platforms? Repurpose messages that you put out in one location so that it's spread out across other locations. Communicating in times of high ambiguity and uncertainty. Where do we need to focus our messaging, and how do we need to look at what we say? Meaning making is a whole area unto its own of research, and it focuses on creating a competitive narrative to characterize, to put a frame around a context of high ambiguity and uncertainty. How do we as a school district, a school community view this crisis that we're in? And that may vary school district to district, community to community. Our states are putting out some general guidelines, or at least working in that direction. Our federal government has taken a posture of deferring to states to take the lead. So the federal advice across the nation has been very generic, very limited to a one-page decision tree that the CDC just put out, that you can find at our website, schoolsecurity.org, on the resources and articles page. And they have deferred to the states. How one state is responding is different from the state next door. So everyone is coming up with a slightly different definition, at least state to state, and it's likely that we're going to see the implementation, the structure, the output from each school district or each individual school, if you're a charter school, private school, independent school, parochial school. You're going to take that guidance and then operationalize it, put it into practice in a very concrete way. So I suggest that you start creating that narrative, create that compelling story, create that meaning now. If you're not already out in front of your school community, if you're not communicating regularly, not necessarily a daily press conference, as we're seeing some governors do, but at least some type of regular communications, then there's some catch up to do, and we encourage you to get out front now and start communicating what you know and what you don't know, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. It's okay to tell what you know, and it's also okay to tell what you don't know. As school leaders and school communicators, we feel that pressure, that push that we need to have all of the answers. And the reality is none of us have all the answers. Most of us don't have the bulk of the answers as to the nature, the extent, or certainly the resolution of COVID-19. What we do have the power to do is to create that communication mechanism, that plan, and that information strategy and narrative for our own school community. And it's also important to identify credible sources where people can get information that we don't have. I don't know the answer to that, but here are a couple of authoritative sites in our state that we're monitoring, our health department, or a CDC at the federal level, or our county health resources. Point people to where they can get credible information for areas where you are not an expert. And also, this is very important, to do a deep dive assessment on multicultural and multilingual considerations in your school community. We're finding in working with school districts and state departments of education and other clients that the diversity within individual school communities and even individual schools is very different. One borough in the state of Alaska looks very different from perhaps the largest couple of school districts in the state of Alaska. One school in one community of 30, 40, 50,000 students may look very different and may have different needs from a school at the opposite side of town or even just blocks away. And we're finding that there are some gaps and certainly some delays in information getting translated, information just from the general public health departments not reaching our different cultural groups in our school communities. So we need to be cognizant, aware of the fact that we have a great deal of diversity in our school communities. We also have diversity not only culturally and multilingual considerations, but also in disparities, economic areas that don't have access to, and families who cannot even access the technology today. So how do we get information to them at the speed or in at least the same information in a reasonably timely manner that we do when we push out a social media notice to those who are digitally connected? And important to communicate clearly, concisely, and regularly. Again, what regularly will look like will vary community to community, but we need to make sure that you are out there, that you don't just put out one message and disappear for 2 or 3 weeks without checking in with people, even if it's brief, clear, concise communications. When we look at the research on meaning making, Seeger and Selnow addressed that in their Communication in Times of Trouble book that I'll share with you at the end of the webinar today. There are some things that we need to process as we try to make sense and try to communicate our assessment of times of uncertainty. And the first is to let go of assumptions. As school leaders, public safety officials, and other professionals, we rely on what we know from our past experience, what research shows, what prior crises have taught us. And it's difficult at times to let go of assumptions that we have as to how those lessons will apply in the current crisis. The reality is this crisis that we're in now with COVID-19 is much different from any other crisis that we've seen. There are some common lessons that we, as school emergency planners who've dealt with school shootings and weather and natural disasters and work with schools from across the country and internationally, know that we can apply in the process to help schools get through their planning for school reentry. However, we cannot just assume that we can template how we responded to a Parkland, to a Sandy Hook, to a Columbine, to a weather and natural disaster with Hurricane Katrina, and have a 10-point checklist that will fit perfectly for how we move forward with reentry in COVID-19. So we can transfer some of those process steps, but actually we don't have the checklist with all the answers and the outcomes because they won't perfectly match. The key is to ask the right questions and to take the right steps in planning, to have the right people at the table, to set the priorities, to seek feedback regularly, and to apply what does transfer, and then also to acknowledge uncertainty and avoid that temptation to over-reassure the public. As educators, as school leaders, as people who take the children from the car line, the school buses, the walking routes every morning and say, I'm taking care of, in loco parentis, I am caring for your child, we struggle to tell parents, I don't know. There are things that are uncertain. But I can assure you 100% that your child will be safe. We want to let parents and the children and our staff know that we're going to take all the steps to reduce the risks, and that we're taking all types of precautions that we possibly can to manage and respond to things that we can't prevent. But be careful, while certainly trying to reduce the uncertainty, not to also over-reassure, over-promise, give guarantees that you can't give. Messages of empowerment. As you craft your message, what is it that you want to get across to your staff, to your students, to your parents, to your school community partners? First, you want to help them understand their risks. What are those risks? What are those risks as you know it? What is the basis for your knowledge and presentation of that information at that time? Do you make tweaks and adjustments as you go? But can you help them understand the risk? What are the risks for teachers who come to school that have underlying health conditions that put them in higher risk categories? What are the risks for support staff members who are in driving buses, who are in the food service lines, who are in safety and security and school policing? What are the risks to students who are medically fragile, who have health issues? What are the risks as we know it? What actions can those individuals take to protect themselves, their children, and their families based on what we know? How can you empower people to know what to expect next? Here's what our school day is going to look like. Here's what our school year is going to look like. Here's how we're going to respond to tweak things as they go, and here's how we'll get information to you. That may not sound like a lot to you here, but that's a lot more than having no information or relying on what somebody heard from somebody who got information from someone else on social media. So while you may not have all the answers, there is a lot that you can communicate. And you also want to communicate how you're collaborating with community partner agencies and having consistent messages. You want to see what your local or county health officials are saying, your state health officials, what your first responders and public safety professionals are thinking about, what those in your broader school community that you work with on different types of safety issues are saying and advising parents, and making sure that you have those consistent messages across the board. When you think of more traditional school emergency planning, as we look at weather and natural disasters and school shootings or major incidents of violence, oftentimes when there's a major disaster, a high profile weather situation, we have incident command and joint information centers. And while I won't spend a lot of time on this in this context, the key transferable lesson there is that you have representatives from different community agencies coming together to share information and to make sure that they're crafting the same messages, so that your public health department in the current COVID-19 situation is not saying something that's different from what your school officials are telling parents in their school community. Let's pause for a moment and think about how we connect. We've talked about the research from high ambiguity and uncertainty situations. We've talked about the fact that people need information. They get information from crafting stories. They receive information from traditional and non-traditional media sources, how the media oftentimes will frame stories, and how you can take a communication strategy and empower your school community. Now let's take a look at how you do that and what you think about as you craft your message? How do you connect with the public of today and tomorrow versus perhaps the public, your constituencies of yesterday? We have to understand that we live in a fast food society. Everything up until our recent shutdown is fast, it's on the move, people are in a hurry, and with all the pressures that mount in the course of a day as a parent, I know that it's very easy to get a tunnel vision focus and you're just trying to get through the day. Your teachers, your support staff, your parents, your students have enormous personal loads, professional loads, academic loads, emotional loads, and their own stories, their own experiences at home outside of the school community that come into play. So we are moving quickly. We tend to get a tunnel vision focus. We are in a me, me, me society in many ways where people are thinking about me, myself, and I, and just my situation. And they're on overload. They only need one more straw to break the camel's back. I think about it when we get homework assignments, when we get that our kids bring home, when we get parent newsletters that may be a couple of pages long, their bulletin, and you start to feel that overwhelmed. It's one more thing to do. Just not one more thing to do today, please. So what does that mean? What it means is that as you craft your communications, you have to understand that a large portion of your school community today, certainly our children, many of our parents, and a good deal of our staff have had some type of computers or technologies from the cradle almost, and rely upon different types of technology and want instant communication, and they want it fast. Slow information is no information in the eyes of many. Seconds count where it used to take hours and days to get information out. People document and share a lot socially. And when I say document, we document by video, by short clips on Instagram, by verbal communications, not just emails, newsletters. So people are recording and sharing information at a rate that we've never seen before. And people like interaction and engagement. They want the opportunity to provide feedback. They want to know how to be a part of the process, just not be talked at, but be talked with and be a part of dealing with the solution. They expect transparency. From a leadership perspective, we know that authentic and transparent leadership in today's world, especially when the facts tend to eventually also get out with a great deal of clutter in social media, that you lose credibility very quickly, or looked at differently, you can gain and retain credibility quickly if you are transparent and authentic with your school community. And again, that gets back to saying, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, here's some sources for information. You gain a lot more credibility by saying, when you don't know, I don't know the answer to that, I'll check on it and get back to you. I'm not an expert and I don't think that I can give you the best answer, but here's where you can get it. Then if you try to push your way through and give some answers that are outside your area of expertise or that you just don't have, and keep it focus on that last point of attention spans are short and your points must be short as well. And we're going to talk about how to structure those communications here very shortly, because people, again, are overloaded. Long narratives, 3-page newsletters are difficult and challenging for the parent who is managing 1, 2, 3, 4, or even more children, along with their professional obligations, their home lives, health issues, and other challenges. So when you work to connect with the public, try to take an understanding and put yourself in their shoes, whether that's your internal public, your internal audiences, of your teachers and support staff, or your parents, your students, your school community. Anticipate and structure and train your communicators how to develop messages that are short and concise, that are delivered to in the various formats that your stakeholders prefer to get their communications. And again, that you have that redundancy, but that you get out in front so that people know what to expect and where to get information from you, even if you don't have that now. Tell your school community, here's how we're going to communicate after you do your assessment, not just here's what we're communicating when we decide to give it to you. Let people know how they're going to get information. You'll get information on these social media platforms. We're going to send out our weekly school bulletin. I'll do an email blast as a principal. We'll have a district monthly newsletter. Here's where to get information. One way of rumor management that we have seen work effectively is schools or school districts that have created a page dedicated on their website to clarifying misinformation and rumors that they begin to hear consistently bubble up in their school community, so that people can go to the rumor page and the information correction page, where you just give some short points to say, we're hearing this in our school or school community. Let us clarify. Here's what we know. Here are the facts. So let people know how to get information. And when you put out information, realize that that information is consumed through multiple screens. We have screens, and more screens. People are getting information still, believe it or not, from their TV sets at well, 4, 5, 6, 10, and 11, sometimes 9. So we have the TV screen that's still there, but we also have the desktop screens. Many of us are at dual screens. Some of us are even at 3 screens or more, just to manage information and production during the day. We're certainly on mobile devices. Mobile is and has been the fastest growing. Our smartphones, our tablets have increased capacity. I just purchased a new iPad that I understand the camera is so sophisticated on that you could actually film a professional film production on today with the quality of the camera. So there are many things that we can do, but people are mobile. So make sure that you're formatting your technology, your social media platforms, your messaging is designed to fit those various mobile needs. When you deliver your messages, think about how we traditionally give messages. When we speak to people, when we speak with one another, when we present at a professional development session, we speak in an order that tends to go fact, another fact, some examples, and then your conclusion. You build your case to try to get information across to people. Today, particularly in times of high ambiguity, uncertainty, and crisis situations, in this context, you need to flip that, to invert it and take a different approach. Start your messages with your conclusion first, and then provide supportive facts and examples. Again, let's take a look back at that for a minute. That's very important. We speak as human beings by building our case, if you will. We make facts, we state in more facts, we give examples, and then we drop our big conclusion, because that explains how we got to our conclusion. But when people are in a crisis, when they're overloaded, when they only have a limited amount of time, they want the bottom line. They want to get to the conclusion first. Just tell me what I need to know. And then I can, if you have the facts and some examples to fill in, I can pick and choose to go there if I so choose. So as you structure your message, please consider that inverted message delivery system, so that your conclusions, your key points get out fast. Because I'll tell you, many times if I, as a parent, or over the years, or as a professional, when I'm getting or a lot of information on overload, I just want to get to the bottom line. Otherwise, I'm not going to get to your message at all. Some additional tips in how we manage our communications in times of ambiguity and uncertainty. Number one, again, manage rumors, nip it in the bud. And it's a delicate balance to walk. You don't want to just be constantly, because you've heard 1 or 2 things that are off base, trying to get out ahead on every single thing. There are going to be rumors, there's going to be misinformation, but we can all tell as school communicators, as principals, superintendents, school communications directors, school safety professionals, that there's a certain point when things bubble up to a certain level that you need to nip it in the bud and get out factual information. So again, an example was a web page that I've seen in a number of school districts for rumor control. You can title it perhaps a little bit differently. but that's basically the point. Here's where you can go to get some factual information, or pushes out through your various other social media platforms. Do not overload, try to condense. It's that old skill of taking 3 paragraphs and condensing it into 2 or 3 sentences. It's a lot easier to write 3 paragraphs than it is 2 or 3 sentences to get the same message out. It is a skill, it takes time, but it is important if you want to have reduced ambiguity and uncertainty and accurate understanding of your message. And equip your key communicators with message points. Keep in mind that everyone in your school community is a communicator. Many times we think that our school public relations person, our PIO, our school community relations director, that's the spokesperson, or the superintendent or the principal is the key communicators, and they are. However, that student who goes home with bad information or misinformation, something that's just off, or your staff member who goes out and shares it with a neighbor, or when they're out in the community at barbershops and hair salons and grocery stores, they're key communicators too. When your school office support staff is answering the phone all day, call after call, equip them with key messages, particularly as we go to back to school with re-entry opportunities. So where do we go? We talked about ambiguity and uncertainty. We know that it needs to be clear and concise. We need to talk about things that we know, things that we don't know, where to get more information. We need to diversify and segment our audiences. We need to assess and evaluate the different platforms that they're on. We need to take a strategic approach to communications. If you have a school communications department, director, staff, we encourage them to be at the table with the executive leadership team, crafting messages today, getting out front today with your school community. So start now. If you're not actively planning, if you don't have a strategic communications plan, if you don't have a simple plan for moving forward, get that in place today. Get out front and start talking with your school community. We're going to need to get ahead of the actual school reopening. What parents are saying, and we saw this in a recent Washington Post poll last week, I believe it was, that they want to send their kids back to school. There are multiple polls that say we want to get our kids back to school, but the hesitation is with those unknowns. So get out in advance, start explaining what you are doing and how you are doing, even if you can't figure out quite yet what it is you're going to do. We have a committee, a team, a task force, a working group that's in place in our school or our school district already planning re-entry. Here's how you can give feedback as parents. Students, we want your input on what school should look like. Faculty and staff, we need your voices. Checking in with our community partners so that they're part of that feedback. But get out front and let people know the process that you're taking, even if you can't tell them what the content, the outcome, the solution, the plan is right now. Let them know that you're doing something. Give them that reassurance. Give them that empowerment. Let them know how you're going to communicate. And it's going to take a great deal of communications at the start of school, but keep in mind that rule about being short, concise, and starting with your conclusions when you push information out to students, staff, and parents at the beginning of school reentry. They are going to be overloaded. There's going to be a great deal of anxiety, emotions. People are going to feel stressed about releasing their children out of the car line, out of the front door to walk to school, off this neighborhood street and onto the school bus. So keep your communications clear, concise, but be ready to get out front and know how you're going to structure that as school starts. And set in place a process for getting feedback in the first weeks of school from all of your stakeholders, and then circle back around and reinforce with them what you heard and what you have done based on that feedback. So there needs to be a very clear communications process that you go through. There are some resources that are available, and you can start putting some questions in the chat box now, and I'll try to answer a few of those as we wrap up here in the next 5 minutes. If you are not a member of the National School Public Relations Association, NSPRA, the National Association for School Communications Professionals, but also school administrators at all levels are participating as members. It's very reasonably priced. They have a wealth of information in terms of templates, communications plans, and other resources that are shared from their different members. There's a daily chat board that goes back and forth for sharing and asking questions, weekly newsletters. It's very reasonably priced. All school leaders should be a part of NSPRA. They dominate the school communications market very appropriately and professionally so. Our website, schoolsecurity.org, I've dedicated a great deal of time and will continue to invest in putting COVID-19 resources there. If you go to our homepage, that first section that you encounter will include videos that we will be uploading and also links to individual web pages within our site on webinars that are continuing as part of our series. As location for recorded webinars include this, which should be posted within no more than 2 days. So you can refer to this and share this with your colleagues. Also our articles and blog and resource page will be filled and updated regularly with different documents from CDC, Johns Hopkins Health Center, and other credible sources so that you can have a one-stop shop that's school specific, and anything else we can, or we're going to be expanding a number of our digital resources, opening up a web store, doing some podcasting, and trying to get information out on a regular basis in different form for you to help continue support you in your efforts. One of the things that we're doing in next week on Tuesday, May 26th, Dr. Scott Poland, internationally recognized school psychology expert and a dear friend and colleague for many years, is going to be speaking here in our webinar on keys to resiliency and promoting social and emotional wellness for student and staff re-entry to school. You can register for that for free. The space is limited. That's next Tuesday, May 26th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And Scott will be taking questions if you want to send those to me when you register for the session. But Scott is someone you need to hear. He's an amazing individual, very passionate person with decades of experience in responding to high-profile incidents, and a great resource. Also, for those who want to do some deeper dives, some easy reading, Communication in Times of Trouble by Drs. Matthew Seeger and Timothy Selnow, who also authored Narratives of Crisis that I referred to earlier in the session. And also, as a part of our services on the website, ways that we are helping schools, we're working on facilitating tabletop action planning for individual schools and school districts, as well as working with state departments of education on webinars to help stimulate the conversation to plan. And it's a challenge, again, that there's not a perfect template out there, but what we are helping with is asking the right questions. We've been conducting needs assessments and monitoring across the country from day one when schools started to shut down and the COVID-19 concern hit the school community. So we're facilitating those conversations. We're doing our webinars. We are also working with schools and crafting their safety communications as well. So we look forward to that. If you want more information, contact me at ken@schoolsecurity.org. I'll put that up at the end. And wrapping up the presentation part, it's important to remember that teamwork is critical to safety. Having that disconnect where the left hand's not talking to the right, or in this picture, the head and the body are somewhat separate, as are the people working on them. We want to make sure that we have collaboration, coordination, communication, and consistency in simple, direct, clear, and concise, regular messaging. Remember that You need to plan with your partners to avoid confusion and conflicting messages. That's internally. No one wants to come to a stop sign like this and figure out, where am I going? So I'm looking at the chat board as we wrap up here. Heather mentioned to all panelists that and attendees that NSPRA is a great source and a great resource, so I appreciate that bit of information. If we have other questions, please drop those in the chat box now. Our website is schoolsecurity.org. If you go to facebook.com/schoolsafety, that's our school safety news channel. I post news stories on school violence, school safety, school security, emergency planning, but I also have a pinned section on the coronavirus and what's going on around the country. Good things, challenges, as well as resources. Like facebook.com/schoolsafety and follow us there. And at Twitter at Safe Schools. We're continuing to put out information on school emergency planning, looking again at that operational aspects of school safety, working with facilities, nutrition, food services, our transportation personnel, our health services, our student supports. All of these departments, functions, and services that support the academic piece. We're talking a lot internally now about academics. We're shifting to that. We need to focus on operations as well. I thank you very much. You can look for this to be posted within the next 48 hours at schoolsecurity.org. Stay safe, and thank you for joining us today.